Hello, and welcome to the Michigan Alliance for Families on-demand webinar, Collaborating on Transition. My name is Karen Wang, and I am the Transition Specialist for Michigan Alliance for Families. Michigan Alliance for Families is your one-stop resource for information and training on IEPs. Everyone here at Michigan Alliance for Families has a loved one who has or had an IEP, and I'm no exception. I have an adult son who started in the special education system at age 1, and I have a high school student with a 504 plan. We're so glad you decided to join us today. The focus of today's workshop is the Transition IEP, which means any individualized education program that includes planning for the transition from special education into adulthood. Our goals today are to understand what makes a transition IEP different from pre-transition IEPs and to review the requirements for transition planning. We'll also learn what goes into a present level statement that reflects transition needs and what makes an effective post-secondary goal. Because transition IEPs depend on successful collaboration among the student, school team, the family, and outside agencies, we'll go over what's needed for everyone to work together. And because collaboration is sometimes very difficult, we'll also go over resources for dispute resolution so that teams can move toward a positive outcome for the student. First, let's go over the definition of a transition IEP. It means any individualized education program that includes discussion and/or goals related to the student's plans for the future after exiting the school system. A transition IEP is designed to make it easier for a student to move from school-related activities to post-school activities, and that includes employment. So maybe some of the annual IEP goals are to make a resume or work on social skills needed for employment, or to develop specific job skills like counting money. A transition IEP should always use information from the Educational Development Plan, or EDP, that the student and counselor create together in 7th grade. An EDP is required of all students with and without disabilities in the state of Michigan. If you're not sure if your student has an EDP yet, you can request a copy of it and meet with a school counselor to discuss it. The Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, IDEA, requires transition planning in the IEP to start in the year that the student will turn 16, or earlier if it's appropriate for the student's needs. Realistically, though, discussions about diploma versus certificate of completion will start much earlier, and some teams start discussing transition goals as soon as the educational development plan is created. But 16 is still the required age to start transition planning. In addition to the annual goals that are in all IEPs, every transition IEP must include measurable post-secondary goals. Post-secondary goals are intended to be completed not in school, but in the future after the student exits the school system. So the regular annual goals become the stepping stones that lead to the measurable post-secondary goals. We will go over post-secondary goals in detail later in this workshop. Another set of stepping stones will be the transition services. A transition IEP organizes the set of activities that will lead to the post-secondary goals. And the IEP will assign those activities to a person or agency and will provide a date by which those activities will be completed. So maybe one of the transition services will involve the parent teaching the student how to do banking transactions. And another transition service could be creating a resume and filling out a job application with help from a vocational counselor at a vocational rehabilitation agency. These are activities that my own son did in high school. It's important to have healthy working relationships for transition IEPs because there are so many people involved. The student, the family, the school, and outside agencies, such as vocational rehabilitation, will all work together and provide input together to make the student's vision for the future a reality. Just a friendly reminder here. I just mentioned that the student is part of the IEP transition team. Students have a right to attend their own IEP and to provide input. It doesn't matter how significant the impairment is, and it doesn't matter how young or old they are. By the time we start planning transition, student input is required under the federal law IDEA, the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. Because of this requirement, it makes sense to get the student involved gradually more and more as they grow up, so that they're prepared to make or contribute to adult decisions during the transition process. Now, if the student is passionate about outer space, we may explore work at a local planetarium or joining an astronomy club. I've helped a scout who has autism earn the aviation and space exploration merit badges. Welcoming student input means that we expose students to adult decision-making processes and allow them the dignity of making meaningful decisions in their own lives. So this is what I did with my own son. He sat on my lap during part of his IEP when he was little. He understood that we were talking about him and the best way to help him learn. By the time he finished elementary school, he could fill out a simple one-page fill-in-the-blank form about his name, what he liked, and what he didn't like. By the time he got to high school, he started every IEP meeting with a slideshow about his strengths, preferences, interests, and needs. By the end of high school, he stayed for the whole IEP meeting and clearly expressed what he wanted to do as an adult. Now, my son has an intellectual and developmental disability with delays in receptive and expressive language. We always assumed that he was interested and able to contribute ideas. High expectations lead to positive outcomes. Now, let's compare the pre-transition IEP with the transition IEP. These are some of the similarities. Both will follow the same basic format. An IEP is always an ongoing process that's reviewed at least once a year, and it's required by federal law, the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, for students with disabilities. Remember, you can request an IEP team meeting if the old one isn't working the way it's supposed to, or you can amend an IEP with new information at any time. But IEPs do have a one-year expiration date, and you need a new one every year. Every IEP also has a statement of present levels of achievement and functional performance, which we at Michigan Alliance for Families affectionately call the PLAFP. The PLAFP is the foundation for the new IEP, and we'll discuss it in more detail later. I want you to think of these similarities as the gears that keep the IEP machine running. Those were the similarities. Now for the differences between pre-transition and transition IEPs. Before transition planning starts, student input is recommended, but not required. During transition planning, which is a process over several years, student input is required for all transition-related goals because it's all about the student's strengths, preferences, interests, and needs, their spin. When we write annual IEP goals, those are for instruction that will be completed in school. But in transition planning, we not only have those goals to be completed in school, but also the post-secondary goals that will be completed in adulthood after the student exits the school system. And leading up to those post-secondary goals, the team will also discuss transition services and set annual goals for those services to be completed, either in school or with another agency or with their family. Pre-transition IEPs are always a collaboration between the school and the student's family. But in transition IEPs, we need a bigger table to fit everyone. We have the student, the family, the school team, and outside agencies, such as vocational rehabilitation, all working together. Now, I'm not saying it all goes perfectly, but we can think of the goals and the different collaborators as checks and balances to try and support as smooth a transition as possible for the student. I want you to think of these differences as some of the tools that will be used to construct your student's future. Transition planning is not a one-time event. It's a process that changes with the needs of the student over many years. The transition planning process starts with assessments. The Educational Development Plan, or EDP, which I mentioned earlier, will be completed in 8th grade for every student, regardless of disability, and transition planning will start at the very latest in the year that the student with an IEP turns 16. Then there will be additional assessments to identify the student's long-term strengths, preferences, interests, and needs, their spin, well into adulthood. The team, which includes the student and their family, will use the results of the assessments to create measurable post-secondary goals. With those goals in mind, the team plans out a course of study for high school. There's a big difference between a vocational technical course of study and a pre-business course of study, for example. Transition services can be provided by the school or a vocational rehabilitation agency or other agencies, depending on what the student's goals are. Now, these steps don't necessarily have to occur in this exact order, and if the student's needs or preferences change, it's always possible to go back and redo one or a few of these steps. When the student turns 18, coordinating adult services will become the priority. This is the blueprint for planning your student's future. Let's take a closer look now at each of these components. Let's talk now about the first required component of transition planning, which is the transition assessments. Transition assessment is an ongoing process to gather information about the student's spin, strengths, preferences, interests, and needs as they relate to future living, learning, and working environments. The assessment process will start in middle school with the Educational Development Plan, and it will continue until the student exits school. The information that's gathered during transition assessments is then used to guide the transition planning and IEP process. Some people like to think of this step as answering questions like, where are we now? What are the student's interests at this point in time? What do they know now about the career or job they're interested in? And how are their work and study habits? Usually when we hear the word assessment, we think of something formal like standardized tests, but transition assessments should include lots of different things. I mean, reviewing work samples to learn about academic strengths and the most frequently used accommodations, or having conversations with students and their families to get a clear idea of their vision for the future, or to help them figure out what that vision might be. It can include observations of the student to see if they're on task, following directions, or getting along with others. Also, interest inventories and questionnaires that help narrow down the student's interests and find out about past work-related experiences, and to get an idea of what the student feels their own strengths and areas of growth are. And of course, standardized assessments can also be a component of transition assessments to help gather information about the student's interests and skills. A couple that I've seen used very frequently are career cruising and the Student Transition Assessment Tool, or StatR, but there are many other tools that are on the market. If you hear information that doesn't make sense to you when you're in a transition planning meeting, or if you don't understand the transition assessment scores that are being reported, you can ask for clarification or context. You can also ask what sort of informal assessments were done if you're only hearing scores of formal standardized tests. If you're going through the transition plan, but you're just feeling like something is missing, you can ask for different assessments and information gathering to be done, and you can set a date by which you'll reconvene and look at an updated transition plan. These assessments really do provide a starting point for the whole team, and they inform the entire process, including developing some goals. Post-secondary goals are meant for the long term, 5 years, 10 years, 15 years down the line, but they're reviewed and updated annually at the student's IEP. These goals must be written in each of the 4 following areas: education, training, employment, and independent living if applicable. These are going to be long-term goals for living, working, and learning as an adult. The projected post-secondary goals in the student's IEP will establish a direction for the school, the student, and their family, and others to move toward. Again, having students participate in setting these goals is key. Students need to be invested in the goals because it's all about their strengths, their preferences, their interests, their needs. Students and their families should talk about their vision for the future and be sure to share it with the school and keep repeating it. The transition plan will usually already have post-secondary goals written in when you get to the meeting. Even though students and parents need to be involved in developing the goals, sometimes that input gets overlooked. Know that what you see when you get to the IEP is a draft, and it can be changed depending on what gets discussed during the meeting. Also, keep in mind that transition goals will probably change several times as your child's interests develop through the years, and that's okay. The process of transition planning allows time for exploration and maturity so that your students' goals can start off broad and become more specific as they grow and develop. Transition goals are reviewed and updated every year along with the rest of the IEP. While assessments can be thought of as answering the question, where are we now? Post-secondary goals can help answer the question, where are we going? Course of Study is a transition service for all students. The first course of study is what many consider a traditional course of study, exiting high school with a diploma. This involves meeting the Michigan Merit Curriculum standards, as well as any standards set by your local high school, and graduating with a diploma. In this case, school services will end when the diploma is issued. Some of you may have heard the next term, personal curriculum. Personal curriculum is a tool for modifying the rigor of the Michigan Merit Curriculum if it is determined that the student's disability is the reason they're not able to access or demonstrate proficiency in the content. Schools can allow a personal curriculum if it's determined that the modification is consistent with both the student's EDP and the IEP. In Michigan, students with IEPs may remain eligible to continue working toward a diploma until age 26. If a student needs that extra time to earn a high school diploma, this should absolutely be discussed with the IEP team. And then, of course, career and technical education is an option and needs to be presented as an option by the school. So, you see, there are multiple paths and configurations that can lead to a diploma. The intent of the Michigan Department of Education is to make a diploma accessible for as many students as possible. The second option for course of study is to exit high school without a diploma. This is widely referred to as obtaining a certificate of completion. Different from exiting with a diploma, there's no established curriculum. Rather, the student's post-secondary goals in the transition plan will drive course selections and everything else. For example, a student might choose a cooking and nutrition class, photography, or a science elective like geology. It's all about the student's spin, strengths, preferences, interests, and needs. Students with IEPs who do not earn a diploma may remain eligible for school services in Michigan up to age 26. Career and technical education can also be a part of the student's course of study, even if they are not earning a diploma. Now, some students may start high school on the diploma track, and then after 2 or 3 semesters, it may become apparent that the student will be unable to complete diploma requirements, even with a personal curriculum and other accommodations. So those students would then switch to a certificate of completion course of study. But I also want you to know that it's possible for things to happen the other way around. A student may start on a certificate track, but then after the student learns to use augmentative communication or learns to read Braille or gets a sign language interpreter in class, that student may be able to switch to a diploma course of study and perhaps even continue to college afterward. This is why it's essential to review and update the student's spin every year. Transition services need to be identified under the same 4 core areas that the post-secondary goals address: education, training, employment, and independent living if applicable. These services and activities must be based, again, on the student's needs and goals, accounting for their strengths, preferences, interests, and needs. This is why I always recommend starting every IEP with a statement of the student's unique spin on life. Transition services should include the activities that the student will complete with assistance from both the school and community agencies. Their community of adults can include their special or general education teachers, related service providers, school counselors, or other school personnel, plus outside community agencies, family members, and other important people in the student's life. Any or all of these people can be invited to participate in the student's IEP. Again, I want to emphasize here that transition services aren't a one-time thing. They're a process that's designed to get results. And the result we're looking for is a fulfilling life as an adult. So maybe one of the transition services will be volunteering on Saturday afternoons at a local food pantry, or helping with a disabilities awareness badge for Girl Scouts or Boy Scouts, or joining a bowling league. It's all about your students' unique spin on life. At this point, families may start wondering how the special education services their child has been receiving all these years will be different from transition services. When we talk about special education services and supports, what we really mean are the individually tailored instruction and related services like speech therapy or occupational therapy or social skills groups that your student receives in school. But when we're talking about transition services, we mean a set of organized activities that match up with each of the post-secondary goals in the IEP. And these activities could be in school, at home, at outside agencies, or in the community. So some of my son's transition services in high school were learning to cook at home in the microwave, on the stove, and in the oven. And he attended meetings with his vocational counselor at a vocational rehabilitation agency to learn how to write a resume and apply for a job. Both special education services and transition services are individualized according to the student's needs, and they both must be reviewed annually at the student's IEP. All right, we've hit on three of the required components of transition planning under IDEA, which are the assessments, post-secondary goals, and transition services. Now let's talk for a moment about the next requirement, which includes information about what's called the transfer of rights at the age of majority. On or before a student's 17th birthday, schools must tell students that when they turn 18, they will be an adult and will have certain rights. While their parents were in charge of making decisions before then, turning 18 means that parents do not automatically have that authority anymore. All students, regardless of their level of disability, must be informed of this. Information should be delivered in a way that the student can understand. Coordination of adult services is the final required component of transition planning under IDEA. The goal of adult services is to increase community involvement as much as possible for the adult with a disability. You might think of this part as our young adults getting ready to leave the nest and living their own lives as independently as possible. Living independently means making their own decisions about how they want to live. As families, we can use alternatives to guardianship, such as power of attorney or supported decision-making agreements, to support that sense of independence. There's nothing in special education policy, such as IDEA and the Michigan Administrative Rules for Special Education, MARS, that addresses the need for guardianship when a student reaches the age of majority at 18 years old. These are individual decisions that need to be made by the family. The Michigan Alliance for Families provides a variety of resources on our website, including information on supported decision-making, alternatives to guardianship, as well as Michigan and national resources. Most adults with and without disabilities strongly identify with their line of work and their work's contribution to society. Vocational counselors are available to people with disabilities through a vocational rehabilitation agency such as Michigan Rehabilitation Services, MRS, or the Bureau of Services for Blind Persons, BSBP. And what about transportation to and from work? Some people with disabilities need adaptive equipment to be able to drive a car, or if they're lucky, they may live in a city with a bus system. Some cities also have a paratransit service for adults with disabilities. typically through the Senior Services Division, for a small fee per trip. Medicaid can also pay for transportation to many community activities with scheduled trips through approved providers. Post-secondary education might involve a 4-year college, a 2-year community college, a non-degree certificate program, a trade school or apprenticeship, or even some combination of these. Skill building programs work on areas like time management, self-care, social skills, and basic vocational skills, which is what my own son is doing at this very moment. Recreation is my favorite adult service because of its impact on overall quality of life. My son attends a creative writing group that has published 2 books of poetry, and he loves to hike at state parks. And he attends a weekly bowling group. These activities keep him engaged in our community. The adult services that people ask about the most are respite and community living support staff. Respite means care at home when the primary caregiver is unavailable. Community living support staff may assist with daily living tasks and personal care, as well as activities out in the community like going to a baseball game or depositing a check at the bank. As the parent of a young adult with multiple disabilities, I can tell you that adult services are a lot to manage. But I can also tell you that these services bring tremendous joy and a sense of fulfillment to my son. So, how does one pay for all those adult services? Starting on their 18th birthday, young adults with disabilities may apply for Supplemental Security Income, SSI, through the Social Security Administration. SSI is for low-income adults with permanent disabilities who have assets below $2,000 and whose disability prevents them from working for a living wage. You can start the application process on the Social Security website, www.ssa.gov. After the initial online screening, you will be assigned an in-person appointment at your local Social Security office. If you are approved for SSI, you will then automatically be enrolled in Medicaid, the government insurance program for those with a low income. Generally, at age 18, once your Medicaid becomes active, you may then enroll in community mental health services through your county, and you will choose a supports coordination agency. Your supports coordinator will recommend appropriate adult services and process the payment through Medicaid. For most services for adults with disabilities, Medicaid is the only payer. All of the elements of a transition IEP are woven together to create specific outcomes for the student. Here's how that breaks down. The IEP will start with a present level statement, or PLAF, which uses data and information from the EDP and transition assessments, including classroom observations. The present level statement will explain how the student is doing right now and what areas they still need to work on. Using the information from the present level statement, the IEP team will write post-secondary goals based on the student's SPIN, their strengths, preferences, interests, and needs. The post-secondary goals will eventually be achieved after the student exits the school system. In addition to the post-secondary goals, the IEP team will also write annual goals to be completed in school during that year. Think of the annual goals like steps on a ladder that lead up to the post-secondary goals. Transition services are the activities that will help the student achieve the post-secondary goals. These services might be experiences, skills, community connections, and other opportunities at home or at school, with a vocational rehabilitation agency, or out in the community. One of my son's transition services that I mentioned earlier was to learn how to fill out a job application. Another one was to spend 5 days living in the dorm at Michigan Career and Technical Institute's PERT summer program, which is offered through Michigan Rehabilitation Services. And while he was there, he explored his interests in each of the school's career programs. So whenever transition is discussed at an IEP, each of these IEP sections must relate somehow to the following 4 outcome areas: post-secondary education and training, employment, independent living, and community participation. Post-secondary education could mean an 18 to 26 program in your local district, or a community college, or a trade school, or a four-year college. Employment outcomes can be supported by one of our state's vocational rehabilitation agencies, Michigan Rehabilitation Services, or the Bureau of Services for Blind Persons. Independent living and community participation outcomes can be supported by the school team, the home team, or other agencies. For example, I found a local summer day camp for my son that included cooking lessons, art therapy, and visiting local businesses to learn about careers. My son also entered art shows and he learned how to prepare his artwork for exhibition. And that experience got him practicing life skills and social skills, and my support to him was considered a transition service. Having a strong, detailed present level statement at the beginning of the IEP is really the root that the rest of the IEP grows from. So I'm going to spend quite a bit of time here explaining how to craft an effective present level statement. The present level of academic achievement and functional performance, or PLAF, gives us a quick picture of what and how the student is doing right now. We want to know their current skill level, abilities, strengths, and challenges. And when I say challenges, what I mean is how the student's disability affects their learning and behavior in school. When my son was in high school, I would ask him, "What do you think you should work on this year?" Or, "What is hardest for you in school right now?" And he would then provide his own perspective about his learning challenges. The PLAF briefly summarizes a large amount of information from many different sources. I just mentioned student input in my son's case, but there's also parent comments and teacher observations from the classroom. Then there will be references to data regarding successful learning strategies and assessments, including the EDP and transition assessments, goal performance from the previous IEP, and other sources. While my son was in high school, my family requested an assessment of social adaptive skills, and the results were helpful for writing goals for adult living. All of this information is related to the student's SPIN, strengths, preferences, interests, and needs. It's important to note that the PLAF is the foundation for everything else in the IEP. All of the special education supports and services will connect with the strengths and challenges outlined in the PLAF. And new IEP goals, both annual goals and the post-secondary goals, will also connect directly back with the PLAF. Yeah, no pressure there. So how are we going to write a PLAF that does what it's supposed to do? When we talk about effective present level statements in transition IEPs, what we really mean is tying together the transition assessments with the present level statement. So we start with a series of questions. First, what needs must be addressed in order to achieve the post-secondary goals? The needs refer to instruction and training, transition services at home, in school, at other agencies, and in the community, employment skills, daily living skills, and related adult services. Going back to employment, does the student need a functional vocational evaluation? This is often done through a vocational rehabilitation agency, such as MRS or BSBP. And which community experiences will help the student achieve post-secondary goals? This might mean visiting your local community college to learn about degree and certificate programs, or opening a savings account at the bank, or joining a wheelchair tennis league, depending on what the student's interests are. Next, is there a need to develop a post-school adult living objective? Well, this one is kind of a trick question because there's always a need for an adult living objective. Can the student shave himself? Does she know how to write a check for monthly rent? Or does she even know what rent is? Does the student have a way of getting around town? Next, which person or agency is going to provide the transition services? It makes sense that a family member would help with opening a savings account and getting a photo ID card. Is there another agency that can provide music therapy or a summer program on vocational skills? These are the tasks and responsibilities that need to be assigned during the IEP meeting. Finally, do the student and family understand how to connect with service providers? Often I hear from families that felt like they were left out in the cold after exiting school, and they didn't even know where to start. The transition process is meant to help families make those community connections while they still have support from the school team. Here's our first example of a present level statement or PLAF. While I'm reading the statement aloud, consider the following questions. How does this present level statement connect with the transition assessments? Can you figure out what type of assessments were done? What are Sammy's current transition services? What type of instruction does Sammy need? Okay, now I'll read the statement out loud. Based on observation, Sammy is most happy when playing or listening to music. He participates in a cardio drumming group on weekends, and he can sing along with all of Taylor Swift's songs. Sammy is currently unable to dress, shave, or brush teeth independently. He is able to tidy up and put away items independently with 75% accuracy if music is playing in the classroom. Sammy takes 45 minutes to 1 hour to eat his school lunch on non-music days and 20 to 25 minutes on music days. Daily living skills are an area of growth. Incorporating music into daily living activities is a motivator for Sammy. Now, circling back to those questions, what were the transition assessments and how are they expressed here? Reading through carefully, it does mention classroom observation about the behavior data. He was able to put away items with 75% accuracy. And there was also Sammy's obvious preference for music. And clearly he is learning a lot of self-care skills such as feeding himself and cleaning up after himself. So those are the transition assessments. Rather than formal transition tests, these were informal observation and data collection. What are Sammy's current transition services? There were several things mentioned in the PLAF. So he goes to a cardio drumming group on the weekends. That's a transition service. He's learning to clean up after himself at school. That's a transition service. And he is learning to feed himself. What type of instruction will Sammy need? Well, based on his level of needs, he's going to need individualized instruction. And that instruction is more likely to be successful if it incorporates music. He's going to need specific self-care instruction to learn how to shave and clean himself and brush his own teeth. He also needs some assistance with learning how to express his wants and needs. It sounds like from the description here that he's probably not in a diploma program, and he will probably be transitioning to an 18 to 26 program in his school district. So he will need some instruction and preparation regarding that transition. A self-determined life for a student like Sammy is going to look very different than it would for other students. But if you read it carefully, the expectation is still written here that he is capable of learning and he's capable of making decisions and expressing his preferences. His strengths, his preferences, his interests and needs are at the center of the statement. Now, let's take a look at another example of a present level statement. We're going to do the same thing for this statement. You consider some questions and I will read the statement aloud. So the first question is going to be, how does this present level statement connect with the transition assessments? Can you figure out what type of assessments were done? What type of community experiences could further enhance Olivia's learning? This is going to be an open-ended question with many possible answers. Now I will read the present level statement. Olivia is a hard-working 11th grade student involved in unified basketball at school and has a passion for photography outside of school, for which she has won awards. Teachers report that she comes to class prepared, she has a positive attitude, completes assignments on time, and asks questions when unsure. Olivia would like to work on feelings, social language and social skills, and attention in class. Olivia's MRS counselor identified reading and language comprehension and soft skills as areas of development. Olivia's math scores were within the average range, and written expression was just below average, while her reading comprehension is significantly delayed. Olivia would like to work in a gift shop or retail gallery, but she needs to develop soft skills for a work environment. Per progress data, Olivia needs adult supervision to self-regulate and stay on task. Olivia's need for soft skills will adversely affect her ability to obtain post-secondary training and maintain employment. Okay, so going back to the questions, what types of transition assessments did Olivia have? There was detailed teacher observation, reporting that she comes to class prepared and asks questions when she's unsure. The statement also mentioned Olivia's input. So the student input says that she would like to work on feelings, social language and social skills, and attention. The MRS counselor also submitted some input saying that soft skills and reading and language comprehension were areas of growth. In addition, the school's testing included math testing, language testing, and there was a mention of progress data from the previous IEP year. What are some community experiences that could help Olivia? I'll bet you had some creative ideas. So it mentions that Olivia is really interested in art and artistic expression. So perhaps she could do some art classes or art therapy out in the community, or she could look for employment at a photo studio. Olivia could even volunteer as the yearbook photographer, or she could do some nature photography and enter more art contests and get referrals to those contests from school staff. And it mentions that she's on the unified basketball team. Perhaps she could work or volunteer at a basketball camp, or through Parks and Rec could work as a day camp counselor. And Olivia could benefit from job coaching and job development for one of these jobs. All of these are ideas that could lead down different pathways for Olivia, and I hope you'll consider ideas similar to these for your own families. I want you to notice that it's not clear yet if Olivia is working toward a diploma or certificate of completion. It could really go either way for her at this point. But either way, her transition needs are consistent, and we still assume that she is able to learn and she is able to make decisions. Okay, one more example on the next slide. Once again, I have some questions for you to think about while I read the statement out loud. How does Lou's present level statement connect with the transition assessments? Can you figure out what type of assessments were done? What employment skills does Lou need so that he can reach his post-secondary goals? Is there a need to develop a post-school adult living objective? Now I'll read the passage. Lou enjoys cooking at home and recently took the meals and nutrition class at school. He has requested entertaining and celebrations and culinary arts electives for next year. Lou volunteers in the kitchen at weekly church coffee socials, but parents report that he struggles with appropriate social interactions. See social emotional baseline scores. Explicit social skills instruction is needed for Lou to achieve his employment and daily living goals. Lou's counselor at MRS has identified training for ServSafe and OSHA 10 certifications as Lou's current training needs. Okay, so what were the students' transition assessments? Well, it mentions that he has social emotional baseline scores. There was a report from his counselor at MRS about future training needs. And Lou had his own student input. He requested specific classes in his area of interest. And his parents made a report about his volunteer work and the skills that he needs to be more successful in a workplace environment. Those are all transition assessments. What employment skills is Lou going to need? Well, from several sources, we have communication skills, social skills, and social behavior. In addition, he has specific training needs in food safety, ServSafe training, and workplace safety, which is the OSHA 10 certification. And finally, I have a trick question. Does Lou need a post-school adult living objective? The answer is, of course, yes. We need to figure out what type of support the student will need to live as independently as possible. This doesn't mean that he's going to be in an apartment by himself the day after he turns 18. He can still live at home with his parents and pay rent, or he may choose a group home or share an apartment with friends, or he could live in a fully staffed apartment, depending on his own personal preferences. And it did mention that explicit social skills instruction will be needed for Lou to achieve his daily living goals. So the team is already thinking about those post-school adult living objectives. My emphasis here is that we presume Lou's competence to be able to make decisions and to express his wishes. It's not clear from this statement if he's going to be able to complete a diploma or if he's in a certificate of completion course of study. But this student is headed toward a career doing something he truly enjoys. We just have to make sure that the appropriate supports are in place to get him where he wants to go. All three of these present level statements give us a clear direction for the annual goals and the post-secondary goals, which is what we'll cover next. So now that we have a present level statement, I'd like to compare annual IEP goals and post-secondary goals with an example of each. The annual goals are limited to what the student will learn within 1 year, with progress reports every quarter, while the post-secondary goals are a long-term vision for the future after the student exits school. The post-secondary goals will be described in general terms when the student is younger, and then as their exit from school approaches in later years, the goals will become more and more specific. Each annual goal can be thought of as a stepping stone leading to the post-secondary goals. A major difference between annual goals and post-secondary goals is that annual goals are decided by the IEP team, while the student determines their own post-secondary goals. This means that the post-secondary goals may change as the student's interests change. The post-secondary goals must be related to the student's strengths, preferences, interests, and needs, and they must match up with the data from transition assessments. An annual goal related to transition services could be: Olivia will describe Michigan Career and Technical Institute's admission requirements and deadlines with 90% accuracy by March 20XX. This goal is measurable with a clear deadline, and it connects with the student's interest in retail training that was mentioned in her present level statement. This annual goal could then lead to the post-secondary goal. Upon earning her high school diploma, Olivia will enroll at Michigan Career and Technical Institute's Retail Certificate Program. This plan for post-secondary education captures Olivia's vision for her own future. We want to encourage our youth to take a leading role in planning their future. Here I have two more examples of post-secondary goals for students with very different needs, which I will read aloud now. First, after exiting the school system, Lou will work part-time in food service while earning his professional culinary arts certificate at Schoolcraft Community College. The second example is, after graduating from the 18 to 26 program, Sammy will shave, brush teeth, and dress himself with minimal support while listening to music. Sammy will attend a daily skill building program that includes music therapy. For each of these examples, consider the following questions. Does the goal clearly express the student's intent for the future? Yes, in both cases, Lou wants to work in food service, and Sammy wants to have music in his life. Does it connect back to the PLAF and the student's spin? Yes, Lou expressed a love for cooking, and Sammy enjoys daily living activities when music is involved. Is there a clear time frame for the goal? Yes, Lou will start after exiting the school system, and Sammy will start after graduating from the 18 to 26 program. Is there a specific step, action, or activity for the student to take? Yes, Lou will enroll at Schoolcraft, and Sammy will enroll in a skill building program. Are there conditions that must be met first? Yes, both will occur after the student exits the school system. Does it relate to post-secondary education, training, employment, or independent living? Yes, it relates directly to Lou's employment and post-secondary education goals, and it relates to Sammy's independent living goals. Is it based on data from transition assessments? Yes, Lou has a transition assessment from his MRS counselor mentioned in his PLAF, and Sammy has transition data based on observation in his PLAF. When the answer is yes to these questions, the goal is more likely to be achieved, and the student is more likely to experience a positive outcome from the transition process. Successful transition IEPs are the result of careful planning and purposeful partnerships. But sometimes it can feel like the doorway to that successful transition to adulthood is closed and locked, and we cannot figure out how to get on the other side of that door. Collaborating on a transition IEP means working closely with the school team and the outside agencies, along with the student and the student's needs at the center. For a healthy collaboration, each party must first understand their rights and responsibilities and then follow the transition process outlined in the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. We know that students are more likely to achieve their desired outcomes when they practice self-advocacy and when the whole team uses student-centered language. These attitudes keep the focus on the student's strengths, preferences, interests, and needs. In my son's case, self-advocacy and student-centered language were the reason for his wonderful high school experience. In any type of process, questions, concerns, and problems will inevitably arise. No one is perfect. By communicating with team members before a problem becomes a barrier, we can come up with creative solutions together that will benefit the student. We'll go through these keys to collaboration in the next handful of slides. Here's a summary of rights and responsibilities going into a transition IEP. Every youth in Michigan, with or without an IEP, has the right to an educational development plan based on input from the youth about their wishes for their future. Students with IEPs also have the right to provide input at every stage of the transition process. The full transition process considers the student's strengths, preferences, interests, and needs with regard to employment, training, post-secondary education, and independent living if appropriate. And before you say, independent living will never be a consideration for my child, take the time to ask what independent living looks like for adults with disabilities that are similar to your child's disabilities. It could mean living in a fully staffed apartment or living at home with family while paying monthly rent. That's what my own son does as an adult. If post-secondary goals have changed, or if there's a new medical concern, or maybe the student is excited about a whole new career path, then the student has the right to request a new EDP or transition assessment or goals. The transition process is not necessarily a straight path from point A to point B, and do-overs are possible along the way. As for responsibilities, families are valuable advocates and allies for the student's needs. As our children become adults, we parents may take a step back from communicating on behalf of our children and instead act as allies when our young adults express themselves. Families help the young adult navigate their way in the community as the young adult learns how to make decisions and connections in everyday life. Families also assist with keeping track of documentation as the paper trail of adult services gets longer and longer and longer. The student's primary responsibility in the transition process is self-advocacy. In other words, communicating their own unique strengths, preferences, interests, and needs. There is no standard transition plan because it's meant to be customized according to the student's spin. All of this is done with the student's participation at each step of planning. In my son's case, he expressed an interest in retail work, so he was able to take business classes in high school and help run the school store. He also volunteered at a nonprofit gallery in town where his photography is sold. Now, I know that may sound pretty sophisticated, but I can tell you that these interests started when he was a toddler, he loved pressing buttons and flipping light switches. Instead of trying to stop that behavior, I interpreted the behavior as a strength. He quickly learned to turn on the dishwasher, load and start the laundry, use a camera, and yes, press buttons on a cash register. This is how interests can evolve into strengths, and strengths can evolve into vocational skills and transition services. The school team is primarily responsible for following each step of the transition planning process and making sure that it reflects the student's spin, strengths, preferences, interests, and needs. Outside agencies provide transition services so that the student can plan for a fulfilling life as an adult. The transition services should be documented as they relate to employment, training, post-secondary education, and independent living. Representatives of each agency can be invited to the IEP. The process of transition in the IEP mirrors the process of becoming a self-advocate. For my adult son, the secret to the success of his IEPs has always been his involvement in the process from an early age. When he was little, I looked for ways that he could express his likes and dislikes. In art projects at home, in an all about me sheet that he gave to his teacher on the first day of school, or just adding his own spices to something that we were cooking together. Self-advocacy can be both verbal and nonverbal. It includes artistic expression, assistive communication devices, facial expressions, and also sometimes words. These little opportunities for participation gradually become a wealth of experience. So for my son, eventually he became confident in saying, I like to cook seafood. And on Saturdays, we go hiking and I take photos of plants and animals. And he even said once, I studied my notes every day and I earned 100% on the geometry final. Yes, that really happened, and it was amazing to see him achieve that. These were all experiences in which he developed skills in different areas, and he began to think more about his future. If you stop to think about it, most adults develop new skills and interests as they get older, and it often leads to new career paths. For our students with IEPs, we want to encourage them to pursue their newfound strengths, preferences, and interests. We also want them to be able to express when they're comfortable or uncomfortable in a situation. So self-advocacy isn't just about their external interactions, but also their inner experience of the world. With new strengths, preferences, and interests, it then becomes possible to create a new baseline for the present level statement in the IEP. Keep in mind that post-secondary goals will be rewritten to align with the present level statement. It's a ripple effect that starts with the student's self-advocacy and affects every part of the transition IEP. So maybe in ninth grade, the student expresses a desire for more opportunities for social interaction. And then in 10th grade, after attending a year of social groups and joining a club at school, the student could make a plan to sign up and practice for a talent show. And then the student requests a drama class for 11th grade and auditions for the school musical during senior year. That love of theater might then lead to a job at a cinema or in art therapy, or the ultimate public speaking job as a teacher or paraeducator. This is an example of personal growth facilitated by the Transition IEP. As our children grow into adults, it becomes necessary to give them the space that they need to become self-advocates. But sometimes it's still necessary to communicate with the school team on the student's behalf. We can still keep the student at the center when we do this, and we can actually help resolve problems before they become unmanageable. My personal method has always been to state the student's need and then follow it up with a question that has a resolution inside it. This keeps me sticking to the facts and following the IEP process. Here I have examples of student-centered communication. As we review each of these examples, consider the following questions. First, is this about the parents' opinions or feelings? Is the communication focused on the student's spin? Does the communication relate to a transition need, training and post-secondary education, employment, transition services, independent living? And finally, what is the expected resolution to this issue? Remember that course of study and self-advocacy skills are considered transition services. And here's the first example. Lou is interested in a summer job placement with a job coach in the field of food service. When could we meet to discuss this? Another example. Sammy would benefit from self-care instruction. Could this be one of his transition services? And next, Olivia is feeling stressed about academics. She's asking about an extra year to complete her diploma. Could you show her how to schedule an appointment with her school counselor? And finally, Sammy really prefers activities that involve music. Could we organize a group to attend the senior prom that includes him? So all of these communications involve transition services, a job coach, course of study, self-care, going to prom. The prom example is actually based on my son's high school experience. My son's speech therapy group developed a script and a song for a group promposal, and then the group of 5 friends attended the prom together with support from the teacher chaperones. It was a fantastic experience from beginning to end, and it helped all 5 students feel more confident about making adult decisions. Just by asking our questions with a formula like this, we can start resolving the issue as a team. However, there may still be a situation when the keys to collaboration are not working. That's when we need to turn to dispute resolution options. The Individuals with Disabilities Education Act provides for 5 tools for resolving special education issues. These tools are covered in the procedural safeguards. They range from informal to formal processes. The first option is to have an informal meeting. This tool keeps the people closest to the problem solving the problem. And oftentimes, it can be the quickest way to solve problems. If the conversation has been happening between you and the teacher or a therapist, and you're not able to resolve the issue, it might be helpful to discuss it with a principal or special education director and have them join the conversation with the teacher or therapist. You could also climb the internal ladder. If you're not able to reach a resolution with the teacher, you can talk to the principal, special education supervisor, superintendent, or the intermediate school district representative. Informal meetings allow you to discuss your concerns and issues relating to your child's education with the IEP team and by reviewing or revising your child's IEP as needed. So you do not need to wait for the annual IEP meeting. The second option is a facilitated meeting. This can be any structured special education meeting, including but not limited to an individualized education program, IEP, an individualized family service plan, IFSP, a manifestation determination review, MDR, or meeting to discuss behavior concerns. The big difference with facilitation is that a neutral third person facilitates the meeting. The facilitator can keep the discussion focused on the student's needs, address and diffuse conflict, and make sure that all voices at the table are heard. Facilitation is voluntary. Both the parent and the school district must agree to the use of a facilitator. The facilitator can be provided at no cost through special education mediation services, and the contact number for special education mediation services is in the bottom left-hand corner of this slide. The third option is mediation. Mediation can help resolve disagreements related to the student's educational program, including topics not specified in the federal special education law, IDEA, such as communication. During mediation, a neutral third-party mediator guides a confidential discussion of the issues. Mediation is voluntary, and it requires both parents and the school district to agree to participate in mediation. The desired outcome for mediation is a legally enforceable written agreement. Whether there is an agreement reached depends on the participants. If an agreement is reached, the written agreement addresses how that disagreement will be resolved. A mediator can be provided at no cost through special education mediation services. They use mediators trained in the special education law through local dispute resolution centers. These three options all keep the people closest to the problem solving the problem. Often, these options will resolve the issues more quickly than more formal options. The next two options are the more formal processes: a state complaint and a due process complaint and hearing. So this fourth option is the state complaint, which is a written signed statement that alleges a public agency, such as your school, has violated the requirements of IDEA, the Michigan Administrative Rules for Special Education, MARS, or the Michigan Revised School Code, related to special education programs and services. State complaints can be filed by anyone with concerns in these areas within 1 year of the alleged violation. The Michigan Department of Education, Office of Special Education, does have a form that you can find on the Michigan Alliance for Families website. It is not required that you use their form. However, using this form can help you get prepared and organized for meetings. It will help you get your thoughts, concerns, and documentation ready. Our regional parent mentors at Michigan Alliance for Families cannot write the complaint for you, but they can support you through the process of writing and submitting the complaint. The written complaint will be submitted to the Michigan Department of Education Office of Special Education. When filing a state complaint, you are alleging that the school district has violated state or federal special education rules or regulations. Therefore, their determination will be whether the district was in compliance or not in compliance. It is not about right or wrong. From the date the complaint is received, the final decision must be issued within 60 calendar days. The Michigan Department of Education Office of Special Education will investigate, typically through documentation and interviews, to reach the final decision. If the final decision includes violations, a corrective action plan must be developed to address the violations. There is no appeal to the final decision for a state complaint. The fifth option is a due process complaint or hearing. The due process complaint and hearing addresses issues related to identification, eligibility, evaluation, placement, free appropriate public education, and manifestation determination review decisions. Due process complaints can only be filed by a parent or the public agency. Remember, the public agency can be your school district. and it must be filed within 2 years of the alleged violation. The written complaint is filed with the Michigan Department of Education Office of Special Education, and they will refer it to the Michigan Office of Administrative Hearings and Rules, typically independent of the Michigan Department of Education. An administrative law judge, often referred to as ALJ, will be assigned. A resolution meeting is required unless the parent and the school district agree to waive it, or if the school district files the complaint. The ALJ will conduct a hearing similar to a court hearing. Witnesses will then testify under oath and they can be cross-examined. The parties will present exhibits and documents, and they will make opening and closing statements. The school district will be represented by their lawyer. While not required, parents may want to consider consulting with a lawyer. You can also reach out to Disability Rights Michigan and ask for advice on a due process complaint. The administrative law judge will issue a written decision and an order. With a regular due process hearing, the decision and order is issued 45 calendar days following a resolution session. The more formal the process, the further you will become from the people closest to the problem solving it. The more formal the process, the longer the time frame for the resolution to be implemented. Each of these options has a place for resolving disagreements, but make sure you're using the one that serves your child to get to the best possible resolution. When we focus on what the student wants and needs, everyone wins. But as parents and families, we also need to know what each person is bringing to the transition process. The school team provides skill building, instruction, and even some types of training. For example, my son took a class in retail operations and he helped run the school store. And he also took another high school class in broadcasting where he did the weather reports and birthday reports on the school news channel. The school team is responsible for facilitating the transition process and sticking to the deadlines in the IEP. Family members support the young adult in learning how to make decisions and participate in community activities, such as going to an outdoor concert or visiting the library. Families are also essential for modeling proactive communication with the school and other service providers. In other words, resolving a problem or dispute before it escalates. Outside agencies, such as vocational rehabilitation or community mental health, can help the young adult make decisions regarding employment and living as independently as possible. Community mental health is the agency that is responsible for coordinating all of the supports that the young adult will need as they exit the school system. The student remains at the center of all guidance and planning. The student is responsible for expressing what they want to do with their own life, demonstrating their spin, strengths, preferences, interests, and needs. Transition is a process, not a one-time event. So the self-advocacy and spin will be continuously growing and changing through the years. Transition planning is a student-centered process that's designed to get results. And the result we want to see is a fulfilling life as an adult. Thank you so much for joining me for this webinar today. I'm so glad you decided to attend. I would ask that if you have any questions, you direct them to your regional parent mentor, and the 800 number is given here at the bottom of the screen, 800-552-4821. You can also look at our website, www.michiganallianceforfamilies.org, for additional information on the transition to adulthood. So please do not hesitate to reach out directly to your regional parent mentor for more information, but also check us out on social media. We're on Facebook and Instagram, and we have this YouTube channel. By calling our 800 number, you will be directly connected with the parent mentor in your local area. We also have a phone line for Spanish-speaking families. Michigan Alliance for Families is an IDEA grant-funded initiative of the Michigan Department of Education, Office of Special Education, and Michigan's Federal Parent Training and Information Center, funded by the U.S. Department of Education, Office of Special Education Programs. Thank you again for joining me today, and good luck with your transition.